Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the first video episode of the Common Room Reviews podcast. As always, you're joined by me, and not Ahmed though this time around. As you will notice, going forward, Ahmed will be coming intermittently, but I will be the main host of all of these, which means I dictate what we do and I dictate who we call on. The second change, or the thing we're implementing going forward, well, I am implementing going forward, is starting with this episode. I'm starting an interview series where we call on exciting guests to talk about what they're doing, and just having conversations on a lot of different topics. And I think that would be a great conversation to listen to, but also personally for me, I'd love having conversations with people from across a lot of different sectors, and hope it's interesting for you as well. And thirdly, if you're wondering what this is on my face, I have a mustache. It's November, so I'm doing November now. No more questions about that. So, on today's guest, um, he is what I would call the perfect representation of the benefits of diversity and immigration within a country. Um, Brought up in the US, he is what I would call the youth of today, um, striving to make the very place that gave him his identity a better place. And together we're going to discuss America's political shifts, his ambitions, and what the future holds. So it's my pleasure to invite Ali onto this podcast. How you doing, man?
Thank you I'm doing great, man. That's a crazy introduction. I'm just trying to get by, bro. I mean, currently unemployed, but also it's crazy that you have a mustache right now. I can't see you right now, so I
After
didn't even know this news, man.
after we finish this podcast, I should be able to flick my camera on and you can see it. But
Dude,
honestly, I
yeah, you
think there's
have to.
probably about five people in my life outside my family that have seen my mustache so far. So
Yeah,
I don't
no,
think
I
the
feel
world's ready
like
for it.
that's crazy, man. Like when I've done that before too, and everyone said I look Polish. Like, do you have that Eastern European vibe right now?
Uh, Eastern European are like Spanish.
Yeah,
I also joke that I'm not allowed within 100 meters of schools anymore, so be as
yeah.
be as that
Potato
way.
stash. Yeah,
All right, so Ali and I, we've known each other what I would say 2 years. I
yeah,
think
like two and
from
a half.
like
Yeah.
second year of uni. We met through a mutual friend. Shout out Gory. And yeah, no, we've always kept in touch. I've been really excited to see what Ali's been up to, and that's what we're gonna be speaking about more today. So, nice to have you on. You can give us a little introduction of who you are and what you do.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and thanks for having me. And also, yeah, shout out Gory for linking us. This we had a bromance from the beginning,
Hell yeah,
so
man.
it's So a little bit about myself. Yeah, I was actually born in London, but then I was brought up in the U.S. And yeah, like from an early age, I was really interested in politics, and that's kind of where I've taken my future, which is definitely a little scary as a South Asian person. Like having all those fights with my parents. Like, no, I'm not going to go into STEM. I actually want to do this. And yeah, like I've recently over the past like year and a half, I've been doing various internships in various like levels of government, such as like the state of Texas, like the Texas legislature. I've also worked for some nonprofits. I've done some nonprofit work, and then recently this past summer I interned at the White House. And now, yeah, I'm looking towards I think in the future of doing law school, getting involved in politics, but also potentially just some independent law practice. And yeah, like we were both at King's. We both graduated, and that's where we kind of were each other's social circles and got to meet. And yeah, that's kind of where I am right now. A lot's been going on, obviously, in the world politically, and
Yeah,
also at the stage of life for me. Figuring out what you want to do, and yeah.
yeah. And yeah, like Ali said, a lot going on recently. No doubt with the presidential elections recently, and so yeah, let's just dive straight into that. So,
Mhm.
at what age or like whereabouts would you say that you first got into politics? I think that's obviously quite a difficult memory, unless you have
Mhm.
like a specific memory that you think. But where do you think that interest developed to start off with?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think we're all, or at least I feel like I was exposed to like a very basic level of politics from a young age. Like, I think, for example, like my schooling, like even elementary school, right, in the US when you're like 5 to 10, it was actually really moving. Where there was little instances where we learned a little bit about civil rights, we
Mm.
learned about MLK, right, and to a very basic level, not really going into the nuanced topics, but from a young age, you were able to see like these figures that stood up against injustice for their time. And even at a young age, when I didn't really know anything about politics, I found that really moving.
Yeah.
There was also like things we would read. Like there was this one book series called like the Shadow Children series that I would just read in the library, and I didn't know it at the time, but it was actually very political. It was like a kid version of kind of dealing with like a fascist or a very authoritarian regime, and it was a story of all these various kids who were living in this kind of dystopian world, mass government control. They were just like trying to survive, and I found those stories really moving. But I had no background knowledge to point to,
Yeah.
like, oh, this is actually like the Stalin regime, or this is like aspects of Nazi Germany. No idea, right? But I just found these core stories very moving to me. And then I remember like 2008 election, I was like maybe 7, and I heard Obama, like the black dude won, and like me and my mom were
Yeah.
like, "Yay, let's go!" Like I didn't really know anything about the
Yeah.
implications or anything, right? But I did remember in elementary school, I was learning about the struggles of African Americans, right? We
Yeah.
learned about segregation even then, and so seeing that coupled with the black president winning, like that was a big deal for my 7-year-old
Yeah.
self, right? Even though I didn't really know anything. But then where I really started actually getting like you know politically engaged with the world around me rather than just these broad stories or
Mm.
concepts was around when I was like 12, and that is when Operation Protective Edge happened, which is basically it's one of the you know continual things we'll see with Israel Palestine, where there was just a conflict with, I think it was like some protesting, maybe some violence on the Palestinian side, and then it was coupled with or a huge disproportionate response by Israel.
Right.
And so what really kind of delved or like sparked this was I was looking at the numbers of like the deaths, right? And obviously it was immensely disproportionate. Like it was like 2,000 Palestinians dead, and a huge chunk of them were children. Like I remember there's a story of these kids playing soccer on the beach of the Gaza Strip or something
Yeah.
like that, right? And they got bombed. And I was super shocked to see that. But the way that I saw it reported on the news or on TV, right, was very strange. They would use passive voice, right, rather than that these kids were killed by Israeli strikes.
Yeah.
It was that these not even children. It was a certain number of Palestinians died,
Yeah. Yeah.
or it was also just like framing these kids throwing stones as justifying getting shot or
Yeah.
getting
Yeah.
drone struck. And so that really sparked some frustration and confusion into me. And I mean, also it was just a little bit of like identity politics, right? Like, oh, like I'm an American. I mean, I'm a Muslim, and I'm seeing these Muslims being killed, right? And so I applied that basic framework, right? But what I really appreciated about that time, obviously, it was terrible, was that it really sparked me to ask questions that were beyond what I was just seeing in front of me.
Hmm.
And I think that's super important for politics, right? Like, no matter where you are in life, you cannot just be very passive in the information you receive. You have to really ask and do your own research, and look at multiple perspectives too. Like, and so yeah, since I was 12, I remember I was very moved. I even bought or like I got like a bracelet that said like "Free Gaza" like at 12. Like I didn't really know obviously the implications or
Yeah.
the nuance of the conflict, but I think YouTube helped a lot. Like I would watch specific YouTube commentators. Like for me, it was, and I still watch him to this day, Kyle Kalinske. He was kind of like a progressive left wing perspective, but also he would talk about. He'd be one of the only voices that I'd see of a white person or an American person talking about this crisis in a way
Yeah.
that did highlight things that I think frankly anyone would see as common sense. Like you should talk about the fact that this violence is disproportionate,
Yeah.
despite any nuanced or historical context. So yeah, that sparked my interest, and then since then I've kind of been very glued on to politics.
Yeah. And I completely get what you're saying as well with a lot of the journalism you see today, if you could even call it that at certain times,
Mhm.
it's very, as you said, they're using passive words. It's very almost one-sided because it's clear they have some sort of agenda when they're speaking, and especially if
Mhm.
we're referring to Israel Palestine, when there are Israeli deaths, you'll find a completely different narrative to when you're talking about Palestinian deaths,
Mhm.
where it's more like, oh, it just happens in war, or it's something as trivial as that. Whereas, for them, any amount of Israelis dying is a completely different number. And of course, deaths in general are more than a number, but it's the reporting in the way in which it's done is super one sided. And I think it's incredible that at such a young age, because I mean, of course, 12 is still extremely young,
Yeah.
but for you to be exposed to politics in quite a holistic manner, where you're at least starting to learn the basics of it or who the key figures are, which I think to a certain extent you also have in the UK. Though I would say that it again does, um, it does brush past a lot of the unforgivable things that the British Empire is or has done. But at least you are introduced to some sort of preliminary understanding. But then for you to also go on and start asking questions at such a young age, I think that's very commendable, and I think a lot more people should do that. Um, Maybe not at 12, but at 22, what we currently are. I mean, there are still tons of people that wouldn't just Google or pick up the phone and figure something out for themselves rather than just listen to something they find a random Twitter account saying or something.
Mhm.
But no, I'd say that's incredible. And so uh, moving past that, then
Mhm.
you spoke about how at 12 that was when your interest developed. Was there anything prior to university that sort of further solidified your decision that it was politics that you wanted to pursue?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So, that was a big, as I kind of alluded to earlier, like that was a big conflict I had because not only like just being South Asian and that pressure for getting a more like reliable career, right, in
Yeah,
an industry
yeah.
that's like safer,
Like
right?
STEM, yeah.
Like STEM, exactly, right? There was also like what I was personally better at. Like I was actually much better at math and science than I was at English, for example, which is like the closest thing. Social studies I was pretty good at in school, but yeah, like I struggled to write. Like I was not that good of a writer, and obviously in anything related to politics, you need to be able to consume. Whether it's articles or academic works, you
Yeah,
need to be able to be comfortable in that sphere.
yeah,
And I was not. So that was one thing that was actually like a big conflict, and why for most of like my school years, I was set on going into like medicine or science or biology, right? One of those fields. But one thing that really did change my perspective was when I joined debate in like high school,
yeah.
and that was something that I was actually quite reluctant to do. But my sister, weirdly enough, who was a year younger than me, she brought me in, and also one of my other friends like just forced me like try this out. And I definitely think I got a lot out of debate. I think it's such a useful skill to be able to just speak articulately and
100%.
organize your ideas well and think on your feet quickly. And debate test all of these, right? We're not really like, I think that's something that's so underrated, and I think it should be in the curriculum of schools to be able to speak comfortably because it is so relevant when you're an adult, right?
Yeah,
Whether it's even at a conversational level, but also like when you're giving a presentation, when you're addressing an audience, super important. And you really get to, you know, get a lot of exposure when you're in this field, and it's super uncomfortable at first, right? Like
yeah,
we would do drills where you're supposed to stand up on the spot and just talk, and it's super hard. Like we would have drills where it would be like an counter or a filler word counter,
yeah,
and
yeah,
like your teacher would be right there and just would check every single time you mess up, and then if you hit like a certain number, you would move on to the next person.
yeah,
So it was all these things combined with like what I preferred and did the most was a 2v2 direct debate. Like speech and debate in American high schools, it's a lot more than just that. Like you also have single person events where you're just giving a speech.
yeah,
It can also be like Congress, which like simulates government, right? It's kind of like Model UN in some ways, where you're giving some speeches, doing a little debate, but it's very rhetorical.
yeah,
My field was a little bit more, it was a balance between rhetoric and substance. Like you couldn't just say platitudes and cliches, you had to also like attack people's arguments,
yeah,
and it was very difficult. And you get exposed to very complicated ideas like logic theory, for example, we would have these very elaborate flows that I'm sure any debater would know about, right? We really have to get really good at writing down information, and not only that, remembering to address information,
yeah,
organizing your ideas in a good manner, and all these skills in general, they made me more comfortable with the fact that debating is really just about organizing your ideas in a way
yeah,
that it's compelling. And once I understood these concepts of like organizing your ideas, also the way evidence works, right? Like you need to claim evidence and impact.
yeah,
This actually translated into me being better at writing. And then later on in my high school classes, like literature classes, language, and
yeah,
even
yeah,
history, I got more comfortable writing and being able to express myself. I was still very limited, but I think that gave me the confidence that I needed to be like, listen, I'm very passionate about politics
Yeah.
now, and I'm able to speak about it. And now I think I'm starting to finally develop that skill of being able to write and engage in like political literature. And
Yeah.
so this is still limited. I think that going to university, one point of it is to get better at these skills, anyways. So that's kind of what fueled and motivated me. It was not necessarily that I didn't have a passion for other things. Like I'm still super passionate about science, and
Yeah.
I never really liked math, but like I like science, right? I like
Yeah.
physics, biology, super interesting to me. History, obviously that's related to politics, but
Yeah.
super
No, of
interesting.
course. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess that led me to make that decision. Just follow like what I was genuinely interested in.
Yeah.
And it was definitely a risk. A lot of arguments, a lot of like fights about like why the hell are you doing this, you know? But at the end of the day, like I have zero regrets. It was exactly what I wanted. It was super interesting. Now I'm much more comfortable writing. Like I
Yeah.
write like I just wrote an article helping with my state rep that I worked for about like the election. Like and I feel much more confident in the skill. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's kind of like a long-handed way to answer your question.
No, of course, no. And actually, to add to that, what you said about debate being so important for, um, speaking articulately, but also getting down your ideas and speaking in a refined manner,
Hmm.
um, I would say that's actually a really big downside rather, of some of the state schools like I went to in the UK, where
Mm,
you don't have these debate clubs. If they do, they aren't run as well as they can be. I think it's a more common thing in American schools, but in state-run schools in the UK, it's a very hit or miss. And I know in my school we
mm.
didn't have a good one. And debating is something I've always really enjoyed as well.
Yeah,
Because like as you said, it's not just about like a debate is not an argument, right? That's a common misconception. A debate is you are analyzing your opponent, like whoever you're speaking to, you're analyzing their points, but you're also replying to that with your own points. And the thing is, you could debate two separate people, and the way you could give the same answer, but you would have to tailor it two different ways depending on what they're saying. And as you
mm,
said, that's quick thinking, that's not on your feet, and that's not in the moment. You can't prepare for what your opponent is necessarily going to say. I mean, of course, the people who watched the Trump and Kamala
yeah,
debate, you could very clearly tell one person came prepared and one person didn't.
yeah, yeah.
However, still at the end of the day, some stuff that Trump said, Kamala is going to have to think, well, had to think of on the spot. She can't come prepared for stupid comments like, they're eating our cats and dogs, right? Like, you
Yeah,
have
the
to
eating
still,
dogs.
yeah,
Yeah,
they're eating our dogs.
fucking
But yeah,
what
you
the
can't prepare for things like that. And not, like, that's obviously a stupid comment thrown your way. But again, even if it's a stupid comment, it's hard to tailor that to your advantage, or vice versa. If there is a point that you didn't think of that counters one of your points, it's hard to navigate around that. And as you said, those challenges make you a better thinker, and it allows you to organize your ideas a lot more.
yeah,
And genuinely, I think if we had a good debate club in my school, I definitely would have gone to that. And it's as you said also, like, I did physics at uni, and for me it wasn't, oh, I'm not interested in anything else. Like, honestly,
absolutely,
despite
yeah.
the fact that I did physics, I hate math. Like, I really don't like, I don't like calculus,
Dang, yeah.
which wasn't my entire degree, so whatever. But the point is, I'm still like, I write myself. Like, I
Yeah,
write things that just come to mind. I work on that myself. I try and expand my vocabulary. I expand the different way I write things. I'm an avid reader. So obviously, like, as you said, you have an interest in other things, but it was politics that piqued your interest the most. And again, I'm of the opinion as well, if you're going to go in at university, whatever you are doing has to be the thing you're probably most interested in. There
yeah.
is no point going in with the idea that, oh, this will give me this job or this will secure this for me.
Hmm.
You're there for
Yeah.
3 years. It's probably the heart of those 3 4 years of your academic life. So if it's not something you're interested in, it is just an
Why
absolute
the hell are you
pain.
doing it?
No, for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. And like just one thing about debating in general, like
yeah,
I want to clarify like that, like debating it, you also through doing it, you understand its limitations and like how to not become like what people think is a debate pro, right? Like I think, for example, like one thing that you also mentioned, when you debate, you also learn how to differentiate someone's arguments from their emotions, right? Like
yeah,
you as a like I know that's a skill I have where like I understand that someone's disagreeing with what I'm saying, especially if they're only saying that, right? Like
yeah,
they're not ad hominems or attacking me, right? you're better at able to have these substantive conversations that I think a lot of people need to learn, because a lot of times people who maybe not be as experienced, when they think you're disagreeing with them, like what their points they're making, they think you're disagreeing with them as a whole, and they get emotional, right?
Yeah.
So it also makes you just like, I think some people, they look at debate and they think it's like super nerdy or like, on your high horse or like
Yeah.
just too intense. But also, if you're like normal, like there
Yeah.
are people like that, right? It was super weird,
Yeah.
super over the top with it. You also learn to be like more actually like better at having these type of
Yeah,
conversations.
just with, like
Um,
friends and family, like you're better off speaking.
exactly.
And actually, I
Yeah.
love that you brought up that point because I don't know if you've seen it on my story. At the end of each year, I put like a message that that I reflect on the year and how it's been. And I can't remember if it was the past year's one or the year before, but I quite literally, my subject was disagreement doesn't mean disrespect, or it doesn't have to mean
Absolutely. Yeah. It
disrespect.
doesn't have to. Yeah.
If you, I mean, obviously on fundamental issues, like if you're saying like women shouldn't have rights, like okay, it doesn't matter if it's a disagreement that is completely disrespectful. But
Yeah.
on other topics, like if you're, if you are a Republican or if you're a Democrat and you're disagreeing on like certain things, it doesn't mean I'm disrespecting who you are as a person. It's just I'm disagreeing on some fundamental things that I don't agree
Mhm.
with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is just that's a sign of like emotional intelligence as well. When you are able to have a conversation, and I hate to quote him, but I believe it was Ben Shapiro who said, "Facts don't care about your feelings,"
Yeah.
where. And it's true at the end of the day, because when you are having a conversation, whether it's a debate or just a general, argument or whatever, you have to be able to discern what the facts are in that and not allow your emotions to override what you're saying, or what your I don't want to say opponent, but whoever you're speaking to is. So yeah, no, I really love that you brought that up. That's a great point.
Yeah, and I
Um,
think like one thing is also being consistent. Like I mean, like even Ben Shapiro, right? Like
yeah,
he can be supposedly objective, and then when you talk about Israel, he gets super emotional, right?
yeah,
Like, or he
yeah,
claims everyone's an
yeah,
anti-Semite.
yeah,
But yeah, right? Like I totally agree that I mean, I think what one caveat I would add is like it depends on your position. Like for example, there's some people who are just not prepared to have those conversations for very valid reasons. Like for example, you grew up gay and then you get bullied. Like you have trauma from constantly
yeah,
getting bullied,
yeah,
right? Talking about your like why someone should have gay rights, right? That's a much harder conversation to have if
for
it's
sure.
very sensitive to you, right? And that's not you just being a bitch, obviously, right? It's
No,
like
of
you,
course, yeah,
yeah, I know, obviously, right? Like it's just that like it's something that's it's harder for you to talk about because you're traumatized from that,
yeah,
right?
yeah, for sure.
But like someone like me or someone like you, maybe who has like who maybe, and I mean, like I feel like we're more comfortable to talk about these issues. We
Yeah,
don't have this type of trauma, right?
yeah,
It's super easy to, or it's much easier to talk about this
for
and
sure. Yeah,
differentiate the ideas and the person. And like, yeah, and I think you also correctly said that like it really does. You just still have to like make sure that they're not actually like a Nazi or like a straight up
yeah,
misogynist,
yeah,
right? Like or an actual racist. Like those things do matter, and I think that's the real debate about like
yeah.
respect versus disagreement. I think there's a lot more leeway than I think a lot of people in our generation
100%. Yeah,
want, right? Like because people do get too like I don't know, it's something about I feel like our attention spans getting destroyed. Where like immediately you see something that's uncomfortable, you're like, I can't do this. That is not going to
yeah,
fix anything,
100. I'm
right?
so glad you said that. Yeah, and the
Yeah.
thing is, honestly, sometimes I feel like I can't even voice that opinion, and I can't say that.
Hmm.
Like it's not even. It's not. I'm not saying it's not that deep, but I'm also saying like think about it more. Have those
Yeah.
conversations. Don't shy away from something. And of course, this isn't talking about the people that have real trauma
Abhorrent
about some of
views.
these
Yeah.
things. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But just shying away from topics because they make you uncomfortable is not the right way forward. Because if you can't have an uncomfortable conversation, you aren't progressing as a society. Like if you're not having alternating discussions, and the thing is, again, if you're building yourself, if you're building like an echo chamber of people that just voice your own opinions, and that you don't have arguments with the other side of that argument, because at the end of the day, again, and this isn't talking about the most fundamental like human rights, but if you're just having a general discussion, or if I'm speaking to someone in the UK that's a conservative, and
Mhm.
I would say I'm Labour, right? If
Mhm.
I'm speaking to someone that's conservative, they're not a horrible person, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Conservative views fundamentally aren't horrid, right? That's not what they are. If you read into it, you'd understand that. But if I can have that
Yeah.
conversation with them, I understand some of their viewpoints. I may be convinced, or I might change my mind about some things that I didn't know. And that's the thing. It's just allowing your mind to be flexible and not being rigid. And as you said, this generation, I feel like it's just it's very black or white. It's, oh, if I don't like it, no, or if I like it, yes. It's there is a gray, right? You need to have those conversations, and like as you said, like debating allows for that, or just having those conversations really increases your ability to understand and just be more empathetic toward what someone is thinking and where they're coming from.
Dude, honestly, like I'll share like in my experiences, like it was kind of weird in uni, because I came second year, right, and first year I was in London, right. My second year, I lived with the like future president of the Tory Society at King's,
Oh, really?
and then even in my third year, I lived with like one friend from cricket, and who was also very like conservative and
Yeah.
in really real areas of disagreement, right. But in both of those relationships, like I'm still friends with both of them, right? And
Yeah.
that doesn't mean that we had immense disagreements. And I'm not even sure if some of their fundamental beliefs weren't things that I viewed as like abhorrent or completely ignorant,
Oh,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
But like I don't know, like one thing that is so true is I can't just label them as a bad person overall, right?
For
You can
sure.
have bad beliefs about things or
Yeah.
just be misinformed, but like there are people who have their beliefs that are genuinely bad people.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
I do not want to. I don't think it's worth having a friendship when they
Yeah.
don't
For sure.
they
Yeah.
don't want to have a discussion, or the discussions they want to have are only led into a place of like, oh, these people are fundamentally inferior, or like as we covered, right, like denying basic human rights or straight up racist, etc. But like you need to have a holistic picture of a human being, right?
For sure.
People,
Yeah.
and also like one thing I would say to maybe anyone who's listening to this who like is disagreeing with what we're saying, like how do you actually want to get that change made, right? Like if you live in a
100%.
world where you don't see the things that you want to see implemented, I'll give a personal example. Israel Palestine, right? Like the US's approach, like a lot of people have been super frustrated about this and are like, you know like screw the government, screw getting involved into the political picture. And that doesn't have to mean like doing a career in politics. That could be being civically engaged, right? But my rebuttal to that, and as someone who really does care about this issue, right, this is literally the issue that got me into politics, is you're not going to change shit by being disconnected from the system that you disagree with. You have to be involved. You have to have those difficult conversations and difficult advocacy to move people to understand your perspective. If
100%.
you if you immediately think anyone who's pro-Israel is pro-genocide, I mean, you could actually dive into an argument about why they're pro-genocide, whatever, right? But that doesn't mean that that person is inherently like the same as a Nazi, right?
Exactly.
They could be misled. They
100%.
could have false views of the world. For example, a lot of old people, right? Like old Americans in particular, and I think even in England, their perception of Israel was like this underdog, this beacon that was fighting against these invaders coming
Yeah.
for it, right? That sets up a narrative that makes it, and when you understand that, it makes it easier to understand why they're so pro-Israel and why they look at what's happening right now in the world in a completely different
Yeah.
lens. And like that, some of these old people are the sweetest people ever, right? I had someone in the office for the state representative who I worked for. I walked in. This was like early on, like a couple months after October 7th, and on the TV it was reporting like, like a strike against Palestinians, a lot of people dead. And I was looking at the TV and I was like, right, nodding my head, or not nodding my head, like shaking my
Shaking
head.
your
I'm
head.
like,
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
Yeah, like what's going on? And then this really sweet lady who I've had an amazing relationship professionally, she was like, yeah, like what these terrorists are doing to Israel, like it's disgusting.
Yeah.
And I froze for a second. I'm like, what? Like she's looking at the palette, like the
Yeah.
TV literally showed kids are dying, and she called them terrorists. But I could have reacted where I'm like, oh my god, she's disgusting, abhorrent.
Yeah.
But I know her as a person. She's a sweet old lady. She like baked cookies and brought them to the
Yeah.
office. Like she is not fundamentally who you think you are. If you just heard
Yeah.
those words outside of context, so many people would be like abhorrent. You cannot have a relationship with this person. But you
100%.
need to understand humans are more complicated than that. Not all of them, right? But
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
lady, and 100%, like I'm thinking of her when I think of a lot of people who are, pro-Israel to an extent that I think is kind of, unjustifiable.
Yeah.
Even then, there's so many places where you just are actually fundamentally getting in the way of your own beliefs by
For
not
sure.
being able
Yeah.
to talk to these people who hold these views.
And
You know what
like
I mean?
actually to even jump in with that point, I've had the same experience with like LGBTQ, right? Like with
Mm,
LGBTQ rights. They're fundamental rights. Everyone understands
yeah.
that. But if we're talking about like the baby boomer generations, the people that were born in the 50s and 60s, they were brought up with the mindset and with the belief that homosexuality is a sin, right?
Yeah.
Religion, of course, like as the years go by, religion dwindles and people think more, but religion tells you homosexuality is a sin, right?
Yeah.
And if that's the fundamental belief you are brought up with, right, it's to just think that okay, when they've lived 50 to 60 years of their life with a certain mindset and a certain belief, and suddenly in a couple of years they're meant to change their entire belief system and
Hmm.
whatever they have been ingrained with, all that knowledge, they just have to part with that, and that's not how life works, right? And again, like you
Absolutely.
said, like I know so many people that they are the sweetest people, and they are people that I want to surround myself with, right?
Mm.
Whereas, but then they will have opinions where they'll say homosexuality is a sin, or I wouldn't want my child to be homosexual and things like that. And at the end of the day, it's not that they've gone out and said yes, I hate gay people, right? It's not as simple as that. There
Yeah.
are a lot of things that contribute to how a judgment is formed over an argument, and as you said, there's a reason why that sweet old lady had that opinion of Israel, because of the rhetoric that she's grown up with.
Exactly. Yeah.
And you can't be so silly, and I always say, like, we don't live in a sunshine and daisies world, right, where when socially, and again, at the end of the day, these are social changes, right? It's not like empirical, it's not like you trying to convince a flat earther, right, where they're out and out wrong, right? These
Yeah.
are social changes, right? 60 years ago, socially, homosexuality was a sin. That's what the majority of people thought. 60
Yeah.
years later, as we've developed as humans and as we are more accepting of people's beliefs and what they want to be and whatever their orientation is, socially that has now changed, and therefore that will take time. But as you said, if you don't even allow someone the leeway to have a conversation, or if you don't allow someone the chance to understand and change their own beliefs, it is entirely pointless. It's just futile, and you're never going to do that. And also, as you said, even with like Israel and Palestine, it isn't even the people that are pro-Israel, but the people, for example, that like I know a good amount of people that aren't connected. Like as you said, they're just disconnected from it altogether, and they think that, oh, I can't do anything, so I'm not. And of course, that opinion is wrong, and you have to actually be there to make a change.
Yeah.
But to then paint those people as to attack those people and say why you like this, you can't be like this, and to have to be confrontational toward them rather than trying to simply explain to them that change is made when you are actually involved,
Hmm.
you're gonna lose them. And you can,
Yeah.
and I unfortunately know people that have gone from very pro Palestine to now they're just completely disconnected from the entire topic because they've been attacked for not being as enthusiastic, or for not going on protests, or for not sharing content on their social medias. And I'm like,
Mm.
that's just, you can't attack people for a different belief if they're fundamentally bad people, and you've had experiences with them where they have, like as you said, right, like they disagree with fundamental things. That's one thing. But if you even choose to surround yourself with them and they are nice people,
Hmm.
you have to allow them a bit, some chance to change, and to and again, like as the years go by, and don't get me wrong, in 60 years time, when we're 82 years old, 83 years old, I'm sure there'll be something that I will fundamentally just disagree with because of how
Yeah.
I've grown up. But if
Yeah.
someone at that age looks at me as like, oh, what a useless old man, he should die, and that's just not the way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. I like, again, I think it's just naive. And
Yeah.
again, as we've always said, like of course there are some areas where it's going to be just too sensitive. Like for example, I have a, like any Desi person, I have a big family group chat on WhatsApp. And one thing that I will ceaselessly defend is like gay rights. Like I just get
Yeah.
pissed off when they hold, like, as a Muslim, right, there's this definitely an interesting relationship that the Muslim community has with this, right? It's a little
Yeah.
bit probably more opposed in general.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, you can understand why that is because that's talked about in the holy book, right?
Yeah.
So again, there's a reason why people think that. But like, there's dispelling these myths that being gay is the same as being a pedophile. Like the argument that, oh, if we allow men to have sex with each other and marry each other, then who's going to stop them from having sex with boys? And I'm like, come on, like, that's built on such a fundamental
Yeah.
misunderstanding of consent, blah blah blah, right? But sometimes I can admit that like arguing sometimes is super draining and futile because
Yeah.
a lot of the time, I think this is just fundamentally true about human behavior. People will never change their mind unless they want to, right? Unless the environment has changed
100%.
enough to where they are willing to accept it, because it is an ego thing as well.
Yeah.
Like even for people who are well versed in debate, like I've noticed this too, and I think that's also one limitation of a debate where you will not. You can be super, articulate about the facts, but if you're in a debate mindset where your goal is to win, not to get to the truth, right? Which is what a lot of debates are, then of course you will never admit when you have realized like that feeling like, oh shit, I'm actually arguing for the wrong thing.
Yeah.
It's very hard
Yeah.
to admit those things,
100%.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So arguing all the time is also futile in a lot of cases, right? Where it's super draining. And I don't think like any of us would say that, right? Like I'm crazy and I'm like a weird political nerd. So I would go on for like hours, and I've done it multiple times where I'm arguing on my phone. But I know that this is not what everyone should be doing at all. And it's kind of stupid actually, right? But I I think my central message, and I think you'd probably agree on this, is like you have to have these uncomfortable conversations if you want to see a world
Yeah.
that's more closer to what you actually want. Like you of being so avoidant is not contributing to your goals of how you want to see
100%.
the world. 100 like and even talking about what you said about like, even when it comes on the opposite end where people lambast people for not being as active, I agree too, right? Like I don't think that forcing someone to post on their story is, means that you're being lazy about the issue, right? But I do think it's worthy as to like asking people what is the rationale for not posting on the story,
Yeah.
or more
Exactly.
importantly going to protests, and there a real discussion could be had. And if their reasons are kind of like just I don't think it's going to make a difference, I think a discussion is worth having there. It's like,
For sure.
but
Yeah.
like that's the best you can do, like, so I think you have to all take it with a grain of salt, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, ultimately I think we can agree that being so avoidant of areas in which there is a valid place for discussion will never get you closer to
Yeah.
what you actually want to see in the world.
Yeah. For sure. And being avoidant, and then also being confrontational. Like either one of those, they're two extremes. You either ignoring the topic altogether, but then also arguing the topic or confronting whoever you don't agree with. In either situation, you're never going to change that view for the better. And
Well,
I don't
yeah, I
wanna,
would say it depends on confrontation, right? What your
yeah.
definition is, because like I've had confronting beliefs about gay rights with one of my flatmates who I respect and like a
Yeah.
great guy. We're good friends, but I'm like I think it was about gay marriage, and I was just like, listen, bro, I like, what are your beliefs with this? I think this is fundamentally just bigoted, right? So I think the difference is I confronted his idea, but not his like
Yeah, that's
his
exactly what I mean.
person,
Like,
right?
you're not
Yeah.
100 exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. Where you're confronting the idea, but you're not confronting the person. If you attack
Yeah.
the person for what they believe in, or if you attack the person for having a differing opinion, whatever you think is right or wrong, and that's what I want to say. Like, I don't want to word this incorrectly, but at the end of the day, these are social concepts, right? They don't. There is no right or wrong, because these things change with time as our understanding changes, right? So to someone who may not believe, like for example, like I said, the people in the 60s who have very anti LGBT opinions, for them it's not like, for them their truth is one thing, right? They have a different truth to what you have, and so those two things are valid at the same time, right? Their truth is that LGBTQ is a sin, but your truth is that it's not. And as you said, you need to attack the idea and not attack the person, because the minute you attack the person, and going back to what we said, the minute you disrespect the person, doesn't matter what your point is, you're never getting through to them.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
yeah, that's pretty much
No, no,
it.
absolutely. So like I would add that, yeah, I mostly agree. I would add one caveat where I think people's truths are based off the frameworks that they hold. So
Yeah,
yes, what you said, like if you believe the Bible or whatever, right, is the ultimate word of God, and that you've been taught and encouraged that this is a sin,
yeah,
then yes, based off your frameworks,
yeah, exactly, yeah,
then you are coming to a conclusion that is correct from your perspective.
yeah,
But I think the debate that is to be had is that there are better and worse frameworks, right? Like you can counter
100%,
that
yeah,
by
yeah,
saying,
yeah,
right, like despite your personal beliefs, there are frameworks out there that incorporate a pluralistic society, and it's not just about what you believe personally, but also the fact that you
exactly,
live in a society with other people. So I think
100%,
that's where the debate is
yeah,
had,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
So I totally agree with I think that's an interesting framework, because you can understand that people hold their beliefs for specific and sometimes even logical reasons from
Yeah.
their perspective, right? And I think that's important because and this excludes people who are bad actors, but good actors. There's so many good faith people who are uncomfortable with homosexuality or things that maybe you and I would agree that are fundamental rights.
Yeah.
But there is, and yeah, and their conclusion, we should not be attacking them as a person for their conclusion as much as we should attack their frameworks for getting there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Unless it's, of course, as we mentioned, abhorrent or
Yeah.
they're bad faith actors who actually are like there's people out there who are grifters who make money off of promoting hate and they don't actually give a like shit about the reasoning, right? So I would agree,
Yeah.
and to most extents, but it's not like there are better and worse rationale for getting to your
No, exactly.
perspectives,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But it's just understanding that people's those frameworks are there, and you can't deny the fact that someone has developed a belief because of a certain reason, and it's your job to break that framework. It's to,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, that's it. Like, I don't need to waffle. It's to break that framework and to allow them to understand why what your truth is or what you now believe in, which obviously is now correct. Why that it supersedes, like why is that better than their framework? And I think
Yeah.
I think that's a really good place to leave that. So yeah, as you said,
Yeah, absolutely.
you came to King's, and you know I would say King's is an incredible university. I had my issues with the physics department, but I would say, in terms of the London universities, you know whatever the rankings may be and yada yada, I would say it's hard to beat King's in terms of like the location, the facilities,
Mm-hmm.
and I would above all of the amount of people I've met, like from
Absolutely.
varying backgrounds. Like I've met people that have gone to council estates in the UK, but then I've met people that I've grown up in Singapore or Indonesia
Yeah.
or Switzerland, and one of my favorite jokes to make to people is, like, you guys did IB in like a private school in like a really distinguished area, and I learned biology from a PE teacher, and we're in the same place. So
Yeah,
it's
exactly,
incredible.
bro.
Like, and it's
I love
incredible
that.
that like a university like King's brings together people from so many different walks of life. But and my experience with everyone at King's has been so pleasant. Like I've rarely, I mean, of course you're always gonna meet a few bad apples, but for the most part, I don't think I've met anyone that I've truly hated or been like, oh God, I actually like I don't know how you exist. I don't know how you go about your daily life. But
Yeah.
in terms of your time in the UK, and like we're gonna go back to the politics here. What contrasting political ideas did you see between America and here, or not ideas so much, but like how different was the political landscape between the two?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think the first most apparent thing, like it's not technically even like like a big picture political difference, was definitely the classism. Like I think there is more of an emphasis in the UK about like class. Like I just felt it was
Very
more
big,
emphasized,
yeah,
right? And like we mentioned, King's was really good at not having this problem,
yeah,
right? But I think the most elite universities in the UK, right, Oxford, Cambridge, they do have this problem where like it's literally in the way people speak, right, in
yeah,
the UK, where people have an accent, you could tell where they're from.
yeah,
That's an interesting dynamic, and it does exist in the US, but not to that extent, right? Like
yeah,
someone may have like a city accent. But like for example, a lot of people who grow up in Texas have my like, except for like the real country people, they have my
yeah. Like the
neutral
typical
American
ones,
accent.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and this is not dependent on what area you're from, what school you went to,
yeah,
right? And I've like personally been on various economic classes in my upbringing, right? And the way I speak is still the same. So it's more a little bit ingrained
mm,
into British society, this kind of elitism and this professionalism.
yeah,
And in contrast, you'll see like American chaos, where like you'll have this like America, if anything, has a bigger problem with like wealth inequality, for example. But
yeah,
the way it manifests is more crazy. You can have someone like Trump, who does not take himself seriously at all, who is still a billionaire, but like talks like actually like
like an
he's like
infant,
a
yeah,
like an infant, like at a seven, like a I think second grade level,
yeah,
right? Who speaks like he's, if anything, like poor according to like a
yeah,
British standard,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
who's very popular with many elites, right? Many rich donors, but also simultaneously faces a lot of backlash from like other economic elites, right? Like the Wall Street side, and that's what we saw this election. So it's kind of all chaotic in the U.S. versus in the UK, it's a little bit more like established, right?
Mm.
Like you dress smartly, like the vocabulary also was quite interesting.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I definitely noticed. I definitely also think you guys have a little bit more, I don't know, like it just maybe predictability. Like one example in your politics, like
Right.
one example is like, for example, polling. Like I was reading a BBC article and it was like to a British audience,
Mm-hmm.
and it was explaining how polling in America is different from how polling works in Britain, in
Yeah.
the sense that it doesn't accurately reflect outcomes. It reflects people's general perceptions and vibes. I think America is so much more chaotic that it's and unstable, especially right now, right, where you have a like election denier in power, that like even despite the fact that when I was in the UK, you've had so many prime ministers coming into power,
Yeah.
it seemed more orderly. Like that many transitions in the US would collapse the country, right? Like even one transition in 2020 created people storming the Capitol, people dying, immense chaos. So I don't know, like, so I feel like you guys have a little bit more stability, and even when your system is tested, you still are able to like move on, right? Your
Yeah.
peaceful transition power exists. Versus in the U.S. side, there's more chaos, and just instability in a lot of ways,
Yeah.
especially right now.
And to jump in as well with what you said, I mean, I think whilst you were here, we had it all the prime ministers that changed. I think there were three. We went from Boris Johnson to Liz Truss for a grand total of 40 days, and then we moved on to Rishi Sunak. They were all from the same party, so it was the same party in power. It was just the the heads of the parties that were changing. But yeah, no, as you said quite correctly, and actually like my way of understanding that is also I've been looking at like the stock markets right now, and it's added I think an estimated I think it was like 1.3 trillion since Trump was won.
Yeah,
I would have expected it definitely would have been a negative if Kamala had won, and to think that your economy has gained that much because of a party shift, you wouldn't see something like that in the UK at all. So it's, as you said, it's a lot more predictable. It's a lot less volatile, I think is the right word.
Yeah, and another example is like even with Liz Truss, she did like what I would call and what most people agreed was bad economic policy, right?
Terrible.
Tax, right. But it was actually punished, and in that way it was consistent. But in the U.S., you had Trump do similar tax cuts, and before that, you had Obama do stimulus, and then also Trump did some sort of stimulus with the COVID relief, and then Biden did a lot of, like transformative legislation, like the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah.
And despite all of these supposedly contradicting philosophies, the economy in the U.S. is a tank. Like it doesn't necessarily it doesn't reward or punish bad or good economic policy in the same way. It's haywire, right? Even the stock market, like it's gotten so confusing because nowadays it doesn't actually reflect your everyday person, and so you'll have amazing broad outlook like GDP outlooks, like inflation going down, job creation at an all-time high, right? The stock market going up, but then simultaneously your day-to-day economic indicators, the price of groceries, 80% of Americans living paycheck to paycheck, healthcare, like 70, according to a Yale study like a couple years ago, 70,000 people die a year because they don't have access to basic healthcare. There's a huge weirdness in the US economy where it doesn't reward any policy and people are suffering while simultaneously things are at an all-time high. Very strange dynamic that doesn't necessarily have a one-to-one reward or punishment system that you saw in the UK, right, with Liz Truss's policies.
And actually, speaking on what you said about stock markets, and like I've been following them recently over the past year or two, I would say. And as you said, they are increasingly more volatile, right? Like if you're talking about the biggest stocks right now, you're talking about a Tesla, you're talking about a Nvidia, right? Even they are volatile, right?
Yeah.
Generally, yes, the trend because of their market leaders in their respective fields, it's going up, blah blah blah. The stocks are super volatile, and I actually read recently, this was I think in the last couple of days, that 50% of Americans now own assets in stock, and it's the thing. As the volatility increases, the amount of Americans also investing in stocks increases, which was baffling to me. With I would have assumed with more uncertainty you'd have less people investing, but America.
Or even the fact that ownership of stocks has increased, right? Like now 50% of Americans own stocks. Studies show that still since the 50s to now, it actually reflects less accurately how your everyday person's doing, which is a
Exactly.
complete oxymoron on the face value, right?
Yeah.
So what the hell's going on, right?
I mean, you go on if you go on Reddit and you type in Wall Street bets, it's like the biggest like stock forum, and genuinely 80 to 90% of the posts I see on there are people talking about how they've taken hits of like 20, 30,000, and I'm like, what's going on? Like, surely,
Oh God.
like some like I invest like a very very small amount, right? Just to
Yeah,
see, just to get like a feeler. If I've
same.
lost
Yeah,
like 20, £10 or like 10 quid, I'm like bloody hell, like, this is enough for today. Like I can't be asked, right?
yeah.
How do you lose like? Some people lose like 100,000, right?
Life
Like so,
savings, right? Yeah,
absolute life saving. Like you're betting your house, right? Like a mortgage on a mansion is what you've put down. You've lost, 100,000, 80,000, 70,000, and you haven't, you barely, and you're on Reddit of all places, right? You're talking about, oh, look at me, I've lost seventy
absolutely.
thousand. Do you think I'm okay, chat? Like, come on now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, no, as you said, there's a lot more predictability with the UK, and I think the transitions are definitely a lot more just. And correct me if I'm wrong, but from seeing American politics, comparing it to UK politics, I don't find in the UK when a party changes, right? So when, like for example, now we have Labour, when we have Conservatives the last 10 years, their policies aren't necessarily like rewriting whatever the previous party has done. It's more introducing things that they believe to be, like for example, raising the taxes in certain areas, or getting rid of the non-dom status, things like that.
Hmm.
Whereas in America, I sometimes find it's, a new party will come in, and it'll be like, all right, the thing that these guys just did, let's
Mhm.
get that out.
Yeah, yeah. So it's quite complicated for sure because in a lot of ways you're right. Like for example, Trump coming into power, he did a ton of executive orders. He did the Muslim ban, right, where
Yeah,
like nine of
yeah,
the Muslim majority countries were completely barred from coming into the country. Very radical policy stances. And then when
yeah,
Biden came in, immediately got us back into the Paris Accords,
yeah,
immediately revoked the Muslim ban.
yeah,
So there is that, but I think it kind of goes back to our system of governance where you
yeah.
do have a president in the US system, right, who's the executive, who does have a lot of authority,
Mm-hmm.
but they can't like directly make laws, right? They don't have control
Yeah,
of the legislature. That's an independent body from them. And so you would actually find that a lot of the bigger picture issues, there is a lot of similarity in policy. Like for example, Biden kept Trump's tariffs, right, in his presidency.
yeah,
Biden did increase taxes for the wealthiest, but it was only by like what, like maybe 5-10 percentage
yeah,
points. There were some changes like in outlooks of economic policy, but I would actually argue that there's a lot that both parties have in similarity
yeah,
because of corporate interests, right?
yeah,
The same lobbyist APAC, right, the Israel lobby, is in the pockets of both Democrats and Republicans. And that's why their policies on Israel, despite popular opinion being different, are very similar, right?
yeah,
Like, I mean, again, the rhetoric and the polarization makes it seem like they're at each other's necks.
yeah,
And right,
yeah,
like Trump said that Biden is a Palestinian, and then obviously there's that fight. But if you actually look at their policies, if you zoom in, they both want to increase funds to Israel. They
yeah,
both support Israel unequivocally, right? And you can go that to broader
yeah,
economic issues. No one, very few Democrats are against corporate PAC money deciding elections, right?
yeah,
That's actually what kicked out a bunch of progressives because they were calling out Israel's actions. And then APAC funded their Democratic opponents in the primaries to kick them out.
yeah,
So I would say if you really zoom in, if you look at between Obama, Trump, Biden, and now probably back to Trump, I mean, now definitely back to Trump,
yeah,
the American average, going back to the average economic indicators of people, of your average American person, healthcare still sucks.
yeah,
People are still economically insecure, right? Living paycheck to paycheck, a majority of people. People's are still struggling, right? Whether it's drug addictions, unions are still decreasing, workers' rights, wages have been stagnant, like real wages have been stagnant in the US for now 50 years, right? It increased for a bit, but then now if you account for inflation again,
yeah,
it's actually gone in like I think decreased 2 percentage points.
yeah.
I think Bernie
And it's the
Sanders
same
talked.
with the UK with the cost of living crisis. Like our wages aren't
Yeah,
increasing enough with inflation, so things are more expensive. And it isn't like I'll just save money. It's no, even the bare minimum I'm earning. If I didn't have any
yeah,
expenditures apart from like to live,
hmm
it's still too much. And actually, the interesting point you made about how policies fundamentally, if you look into them, they're similar.
yeah,
I was listening to LBC, which is a leading British radio show, I guess. And every morning they were talking, and this was the morning of the election, I
Mm.
believe, where they were still speculating because obviously because of time differences, they had just started voting at like early morning on the 6th here.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
And they were speaking about different communities and how, where their votes have gone. And I can't remember exactly what state they were talking about, but they mentioned a really big Arab community in one of these states.
Michigan, yeah.
In Michigan, yeah, it was one of the swing states, yeah. They were talking about a really big Arab community. And they were debating whether Kamala had done enough to, attract the votes of those Arab voters. And they mentioned, I believe, Trump had gone to Michigan to speak to them and, understand their perspectives, yada yada, right? And I
Hmm.
was talking about this to some of my friends, and they were like, "Yeah, Trump is, Trump is really like pro-Palestine, and he's looking to end the war and blah blah." And I was like, "No, he's not. What are you
Yeah,
talking about?" So I was
yeah,
like, "Okay, I can refute this in one Google search." I genuinely just Googled,
exactly.
what is Trump's stance on Palestine, or what is Trump's stance on Israel, and there was a perfectly written article on whatever he had said and whatever his viewpoints are
Hmm.
on that. And genuinely, the only thing he had said, which unfortunately got used as, oh, Trump's pro Palestine, is he wants to end the war. He wants peace in the Middle
Yeah,
East,
which
right?
actually doesn't mean much if you think
Yeah.
about it, because
And it's
ending a
like,
war can mean finishing a job,
yeah,
right?
exactly. And it's like, okay, peace in the Middle East, it sounds great, but what does that mean, right?
Yeah,
He hasn't
exactly.
said, oh, I want, the suffering of the Palestinian people to stop. No, it's peace in the Middle East, right?
Hmm.
Um, and unfortunately, you have all of these voters and people that don't make informed decisions where they hear a headline or they hear a quote from him, and they're like, "Yeah, oh my God, he's there for us." Um, and again, exactly, he is very pro-Israel, and as you said, if you fundamentally look into that, you would understand that. Whereas on the on the surface of it, you would think, oh, Biden's pro-Israel, or Kamala's pro-Israel, Trump is pro-Palestine. Oh, would you look at that? I'm gonna vote for Trump. Which again, and actually speaking of going back to tariffs again, what you said, where
Hmm.
Trump, his entire thing on tariffs is entirely misunderstood. The
Mm.
tariffs he keeps on talking about increasing them, and he's like, China will have to pay, China will have to pay. That's not how
We
these
will have to
tariffs
pay.
work. It's the people in America who are importing these goods have to pay that higher tariff. China's
Yeah,
not going to pay. China's not stupid, right? I think
exactly.
I think it was Mark Cuban who gave a really good example where he was talking about, for example, Walmart imports a product, and it costs them 10 cents on the dollar, right? That's their tariff.
Hmm.
Now we've increased tariffs, right, to let's say 40 cents. Walmart's not going to pay for that. They're just going to up their prices to counteract the increase in tariff they have to pay. They're not going to just sell
Absolutely.
it for the same amount of price and pay that extra 30 cents on the
Exactly.
dollar. And there was actually, I saw a tweet recently of, here's an example where someone I know is working at this place and they've just realized that they have to pay these tariffs and it's not China paying these tariffs. And unfortunately, as you said, I mean, it's all of these uneducated votes, which is why we now have Trump as
Absolutely. Yeah.
as your president. But also, and again, I saw a lot of tweets about this, but someone was like, "Oh, why the people that are panicking the most aren't even living in America? Like, calm down." And then the reply was, "We would calm down if America wasn't the most influential country
Of
in the
course.
world." And whether we
100%.
like it or not, and we're not saying the most important is probably China. If they stop producing, it's half the world's goods that no one's getting. But if we're talking about
Mm.
influence, it's America. It is the most influential election ever, like in the world. There is no
Why?
other country that has more of an impact, and that is reflected in the stock markets. That's reflected everywhere. And so,
Absolutely.
unfortunately, the decisions made by Americans impact everyone in the world. And so, it's so important, as you said, to have those informed decisions and to be tapped into politics, which is the whole point of obviously this podcast, which is just to really
Yeah.
make people understand that you can't have this wishy washy attempt at understanding something that decides your life, because it quite
Hmm.
literally does.
Yeah,
And
dude, I'm literally just thinking about right now, like
yeah,
the Muslims that are voting for Trump. Like, I know like,
yeah,
I'm willing to have a conversation with you, but you are either super uninformed or very easily to manipulate. Like,
yeah,
come on, like it's such a irrational decision. And not only Trump is more pro-Israel, he's the most pro-Israel president in U.S. history. He's the only one that people aren't sure of whether he even supports a two-state
yeah,
solution. Like there, and yeah, like you said, look up an article. I mean, I even wrote about this. Like he's the guy who said settlements in the West Bank are not illegal in international law. There's literally a place in Israel near the Golan Heights called Trump Heights as a thank you to him for annexing
yeah,
Israeli territory. This guy has the Adler family, a very rich, extremely Zionist and very radical family who their demand in 2016 when they donated to him
yeah,
was that you should move the capital or the embassy of the US to Jerusalem and kind of reinforcing the idea that Jerusalem's the capital. Guess what? He did that when he came in power. And you know what they're asking for now? They're asking for the entire West Bank to be annexed to Israel. This guy is the most fundamentally pro-Israel president. And just because this guy in front of you has been in power right now and doing a pretty
yeah.
pro-Israel stance, like you need to think harder than that. You need to be a little bit less stupid than that. Come on, like that actually has pissed me off,
Yeah,
man. Like I
and
do not
it's
understand
not
how people
even
do that.
just the Muslim community. It is unfortunately it is
Yeah,
literally anyone that's not white, right? Trump very clearly does not like anyone that isn't white. And actually, like to say, with your example, I say the exact same thing about Indians in America, right? They have had, I would love again love to have a conversation with them, but I also look at them and think you cannot be this stupid.
yeah,
Like, as a person of color, Trump immediately does not like you, no matter what he says. And again, this is going back to what you said about how Trump speaks. Unfortunately, to an averagely or uneducated mind, big statements, short sentences, and big claims work more than an educated claim. And that's exactly what we've seen in this election, where
hmm
Kamala has a very educated answer, a very educated response. But unfortunately, Trump with his I love Indians. I love Arabs.
I
It's
love
like
India. They're great. I
yeah,
love the
yeah,
Arabs.
literally, yeah, exactly. And for
Yeah,
example, I remember during his first term, when they had Howdy Modi, where Modi came to it was
yeah.
Texas, right?
Trump ki bar sarkar, right?
Yeah, yeah, he came to was it Texas, right? He came to
Yeah, he went to Houston. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, he came. And then obviously he had same one in India, and it's like,
yeah.
again, to the impressionable, as you said, you see that rally, you see, Howdy Modi, and you're like, oh my god, I love Indians, oh wow, they're so great. Or you see Trump going to an Arab community and understanding their problems and really, he's such a caring guy. That's all it takes, unfortunately, for the
So
uneducated.
sad.
And I
Yeah.
remember even seeing the statistics come out from after the election, and it was the amount of people that had degrees who voted for the Democrats compared to the amount of people who didn't have degrees. And of course, that's
Dominated.
not that a degree isn't the only metric for being educated, of course, but it's a
Cool.
very big metric, right? And because you've seeked education, you are further educated than someone else, and oh shock, more people with a degree voted for, voted Democrat
Vastly
than they
more
did.
too.
Yeah, vastly. I think it was like 70%. It was like insanely amount, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah, no shit, right? If you're educated, you vote for her. If you're not, you vote for him. But
Mhm.
that
Yeah.
is.
I
Yeah.
mean, again, I don't know if we want to get into the election now, but like I mean, to be honest, there's a lot of thoughts right now, a lot of finger pointing, and
Yeah.
I think I have a lot of my like really like critiques that I think are really fundamentally reflect like why our party, or not even our party, why the Democrats failed. But I think even beyond that, I do think a lot of it was inevitable just because A, she started campaigning so late because Biden dropped
Yeah.
out late,
Yeah. Yeah.
and B, because the people's perceptions about the economy was so fundamentally low that's just fundamentals, right? It's the
Yeah.
economy, stupid, right? If the perceptions about the economy are that bad, the incumbent party is kind of fucked no matter
Yeah.
what. Like it'll be a
No, for sure.
very it's a huge uphill battle. So, like, regardless of where I think they made strategic failures, which I think everyone agrees, like, Kamala is not the best candidate at all. But she was just better if you look individually at
Yeah.
issues, right?
And as you said, that's exactly what I was having the conversation with as well, where she had what it was like 100 and something days, right, to campaign. It's nothing,
That's nothing.
absolutely nothing to because and obviously it wasn't that Biden was there, he dropped out, you had Kamala. Biden was getting berated. He got kicked out, right?
Yeah,
Essentially.
it was embarrassing. Yeah.
And whilst he was there, the public perception of the Democratic Party was decreasing. So now you have Kamala come in. And I would say also a big reason that she didn't get in is unfortunately she's a black woman, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of course, as you
Yeah.
said, there were strategic failures, but the country itself can't look past color, it can't look past gender. And so
Yeah.
it was doomed, inevitably. Though still thought that when you're choosing between a convicted felon and a lady who has worked in all three
A
departments of
prosecutor.
government, yeah,
Yeah.
you would choose the right one, but clearly not. But
Yeah.
yeah, we don't need to like actually dive in because I think that's like an entire different podcast.
That's fair.
Speaking
Yeah.
about what happened, but no, I completely agree with you. There were a lot of strategic failures, but it comes
Yeah.
down to like in education, right?
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
no, but
Sure.
also speaking of that, you to everyone that doesn't know, you did an agency liaison intern or
Hmm.
internship at the
Yeah.
office of the presidential correspondent.
Hmm. Yeah.
So yeah, just more on that. Like what was your role? How did they let you in? um,
On
uh,
God,
yeah.
right?
And yeah, just like what your experience was.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like towards my third year, I was like, what are the steps ahead of me? I think I decided I want to go back to the U.S. just because my political interest in U.S. politics is the highest, and also my knowledge about it is the most.
Yeah.
And also, like we mentioned earlier, it's the most influential country. Right, the decisions made there affect the whole world. So I was like, okay, what's better than a White House internship? Like I saw it on some newsletter or something, and I'm like, you know what? That sounds so fucking cool. Like,
Yeah.
the executive, right? The president is the most powerful individual in politics, and they can do a shit ton. They control every single government agency.
Mm-hmm.
They can do their executive orders, and their powers. They have the bully pulpit, right? They can influence even Congress to create the laws they want. They make the court appointments. Very big deal. Who's in power? And to be honest, I had a lot of qualms with the Biden administration,
Yeah.
and I think, but like they did a lot of legislation that I thought was pretty impressive. Like for example, the Inflation Reduction Act that had the single biggest investment into combating climate change out of any government ever, right, in the history of the world. That's a big deal. The PRO Act, right, pro union legislation, which I think is very needed in the time of AI, and where we're fundamentally rethinking how work, right? The concept of work, how many hours people should have, paid time leave. All these are really important discussions. Other things like the infrastructure bill. Another thing is Lena Khan and his appointments in government agencies. Lena Khan, the head of the Federal Trade Commission, she's fundamentally, reshaped the way in which we tackle corporations. Like before, you may have known with Johnson and Johnson, or I think it was Johnson and Johnson, the people who were actually, I don't think it was them, but the people responsible for creating the opioid crisis and purposely ignoring studies about how
Yeah.
harmful it is, all they had to do at the end was pay like a fine, right? It was a big
Yeah.
fine, but it was a fine that the company can recover from.
No, for sure.
She
Yeah.
has fundamentally revamped in how we tackle corporations by doing huge sweeping lawsuits that force these companies to change their rules and regulations in the way they play.
Yeah.
Amazing. And I think she's a Pakistani American. Like government is starting to look like the actual American populace. And not only that, more importantly than just your identity, the ideas at play were amazing ideas. Like Biden
Yeah.
is the first president in U.S. history to set foot on a picket line. U.S. presidents have had a terrible history with unions. They've
Yeah.
literally called the military to kill strikers in the past. Like
Yeah.
that is a big deal, right? So with all that context at play, I was like, yeah, I want to apply to this. So I applied like towards the end of third year. I put in so much effort, and I didn't get it the first time. And the way you apply is literally just on their website. You have to have recommendation letters. You have to
Yeah.
answer like essays, and I put like 30 hours to do it. I'm not gonna lie, like I
That's
really,
insane. Yeah.
yeah. I didn't get it the first time, and I think the biggest reason was I didn't have direct political experience. Like I
Okay.
had some like other than just like keeping up to with politics, telling my friends to vote when elections happen. I didn't
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
enough actual experience, and I'm like,
Yeah.
why the fuck do I not have that?
And it's
So
demonstratable experience as well. Yeah.
demonstratable 100%, right? So when I graduated, I after I got rejected, I had a game plan. I didn't give up, and I started working. Like, I was already following a Texas representative who was the first Muslim and South Asian elected into the Texas body of government. And so, for those of you who may not know, the U.S. has a federalist government structure where they have the federal level, right, the president, Congress. You have a state level, which has a governor, which is like a president for a state, and then you have the state legislature, like state Congress and the Senate, and then you have the city level. So this person was in the Texas legislature, which is a big deal, right? Texas is the 7th largest economy in the world. So what happens in Texas is also a big deal. Yeah. So I started working for this just as an intern, and I really grew in my role. I learned the nature of working for a political candidate. And one I guess fact I'll share that's quite interesting is a lot of what's done for a candidate is not the candidate at all. Any of the written statements, it's a team doing that. Any of the messages that you see people responding to if you email them, that's staff. Yeah. But people don't really understand that aren't into politics. They think the politician does everything. Yeah. They're actually, the best analogy I heard is the politician that you're representing is a football, right? For British terms, a football on a field. And the staff are the ones who are the actual players. Yeah. And what their goal is to move your ball around on certain issues. So the politician's almost like a puppet. Not fully, because obviously they choose who their staff is around them. Yeah. But their job is so busy.
Their image, so yeah.
Yeah, right. And their job is so busy that they're controlled by they don't have time to decide their schedule. They don't have time for who they should be meeting. You have to manipulate them. So I learned all of these concepts and got a lot of exposure. One thing I'm really proud of was after October 7th happened, my representative was much more hesitant about saying anything about the crisis because he's at the state level, right? Yeah. State doesn't decide foreign policy. He has no influence on what the U.S. decides to do, support or non-support wise. But I still think his perspective mattered because of his identity as the first Muslim and South Asian in the Texas government. And also, he's like the Muslim community backs him and looks up to him. Yeah. And what is the point of getting into these positions if you don't be a voice for what these populations are saying is on their minds? So I convinced him, like literally, like just at our group chat, I left a super long message and I'm like, listen, the Muslim community cares heavily about this issue. It's not just a Muslim issue, it's a human rights issue. Yeah. You should speak up and it'll be advantageous for you because if you don't, you're not going to get invited to masjids or mosques for speeches. You're not going to get invited to these very important things. And you have plenty of contacts in the Jewish community. You be that voice that changes their mind because I'm sure they're in their echo chambers and they think anyone who criticizes Israel is pro-Hamas. That's not true at all. So after that, he decided to change his opinion. And me and the staff worked on an op-ed in the Dallas Morning News that talked about having a better approach. You can check it out. I think it's search up Salman Bojani op-ed Dallas Morning News and you'll find it. And it's just about being more consistent. You can call out the harms and the children who died on October 7th, but simultaneously call out the people who died and got murdered in Palestine, right? So many innocent people. So we did that. We released some statements. And that was amazing in giving me that exposure and that confidence. So I applied again, and for the summer, I had this new experience under my belt. And then they reached out for an interview. I got reached out for an interview. I was super excited. Oh, actually, one other context that was really important, and I think it was just one of those like meant to be things. The legislative director for this politician I was working for, she was a White House intern 10 years ago for the Obama administration. Wow. So she gave me a ton of advice on how to conduct my interview, what to talk about, and a big thing was where to apply. She was a White House intern in OPC, the Office of Presidential Correspondence, and that is the one where I ended up applying to. And you can rank your choices on a scale of 1 to 5. I put that as my first option. And the reasoning, what OPC does is they're all about responding. Correspondence in politics is all about responding to people who send you messages. And those can be various types of messages, right? They could just be someone mailing the president being like, oh, I think you should change your policy on this, or good job with that. Or it can also be because of the power of the president, someone asking for help, like, President, can you please pardon me from jail, which is what power the president has. Or someone stuck in another country being like, I need to get the hell out of here. I need assistance to evacuate. Yeah. It can be things like that. So OPC covers all those branches. And it's also the largest branch of interns. Like it has like 20 something interns because there's so much manpower you need to respond to all these messages, right? So I applied to that, put that as my number one option, got reached out to for an interview, and very nervous, but like I prepared. I got some advice from this former intern,
Yeah.
and it went really well. Like, you know, I was asked to share about my experiences, how I deal with difficult scenarios, and I was able to draw from real political stuff. Like I
Yeah.
talked about the letter, but I didn't mention the specifics because I don't want to talk about Israel Palestine with the Biden admin, right? But
Yeah.
um, and honestly, like one thing I'll share, like is in writing my like essays, I did do a lot of research about my own story and how I
Yeah.
got here. Like I immigrated to the US at like 3, and I was escaping
Yeah.
like some like basically a precarious situation. And one reason I'm actually in like got was allowed to get into the country was because of the WAWA, right? The Violence Against Women's Act. And in one of those provisions, there's basically this idea of self petitioning,
Mm.
which is if you come to a country and have conflicts with your original sponsor, you can still self petition and gain legal status into the
Yeah.
country. And so it turns out that WAWA, the initial WAWA that was pushed, was one of Joe Biden's accomplishments when he was a senator.
Wow.
So, and I got updated, and new provisions were enacted. But basically, the actions of Biden are the reason I'm in this country. And that is just objectively true. So,
Yeah.
like, that was a big deal. And I talked about that a lot. And I think that was moving to them for sure. And I think that reflects that theme of, like, you know, that's the power of politics, where you fighting for important ideas, important legislation can create real realities for people you will never meet, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm a who was not even born when Biden pushed this, but I was able to have a new life and a much better life than I would
Yeah.
have had because of his actions. And that's, again, that's so powerful. And so, yeah, that's like a long story of how I got accepted. Like the interview went well. Then I just had a drug test where you had to pee in a cup because federal jobs, right?
Yeah.
You be on drugs. Obviously, that was fine. So then I got in. It started in the summer, and yeah, my work around OPC. So I'm very happy with what I was assigned to do. As I mentioned, OPC has a lot of responsibilities. There's some who are digital response who are just looking at emails coming in about people's opinions.
Yeah.
There are some people who are on the writing team who help like write letters on behalf of Biden to like more local politicians. There was also the greetings and comment line, which is a fucking clusterfuck. Like it's basically a voluntary line that's open like 3 days a week where people can call and voice your concerns. And as you can
Oh, good lord.
expect, full of crazies, full of like
Yeah.
weirdos. I've gotten cussed out all the time. Like because all of the interns, some interns are that's their main role, but all of the interns have to do a shift a week at the comment
Right.
line when we were interns there. So yeah, it was crazy. But my agency was it was agency liaison, right? And what agency liaison does, it's all about casework. So it's not just messages of opinions, it's messages of people who can actually potentially get help from the
Right.
president or any government agency. And that was super fulfilling for me because it's literally just about helping people, right? So we would deal with people who need help with student loans. We would receive their message, and we'd able to determine that, oh, we can send them to the Department of Education to potentially get their students' loans relieved.
Yeah.
People from stuck in other countries, we could call like Israel, Gaza. There were people stuck in Israel. We didn't, unfortunately, and that one thing that pisses me off, right, is weren't able to help that many Palestinians stuck, Palestinian Americans stuck. But we can contact the Department of State to help them get out. So it was a really cool role where you get to understand the capacities of the government
Mm.
as well as the limitations of the government. But it was quite a grind. Like it was definitely like tiring work. You're on a screen all the time.
Yeah.
We had digital mail as well as physical mail. A lot of boomers who have like terrible handwriting that we had to decipher to help them
Yeah.
get their social security payments. But at its best, we were helping people who didn't know how to interact with the government. That's another
Yeah.
big deal, right? Lack of knowledge doesn't only mean that you don't know how to make a change. It's also you don't know how to get help.
Yeah.
And so all these people are messaging the White House, and we were liaisoning, we were guiding them to get the help. And sometimes we get invoice back that, oh, this person was supposed to be getting their social security, wasn't getting it, and because of your work to direct them to the right
Yeah.
agency, they're now getting their checks, right?
Yeah.
So
That's so fulfilling as well.
amazingly fulfilling. You're helping countless people, and it was hard, right? Like the nature, like we were even asked in the interview, how do you deal with dark or bad news? Because a lot of what people need help for is terrible, like disasters, in poverty, homeless, victims of abuse, but like it's so important because these are the people who are the most vulnerable in society and need the most help, right? So yeah, it was hard work. It was a grind, but like me and my team of three. So broader department has like around 22 interns, but my team had it was four.
Mm.
It was me, some person, girl from Guam, like an American territory next to Japan. It
Wow.
was some guy from Philadelphia and some other guy from North Carolina. All super cool people and amazing teamwork. And yeah, we were able to do that hard work, and it was an amazingly rewarding experience for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, I've seen the pictures as well when you're standing right behind Biden, which is actually
Yeah,
insane in front of the White House.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and yeah, as you said, like it's a super fulfilling role in and of itself because you are directly helping people, you're directly making that change, and it ties in again with what you've
Yeah.
been saying, where or what I this the point of this thing was, which is how does the youth in America at least make that change, right? How do you strive to go out and make an impact? You know, whether that is, and you know, on the outskirts, what are you doing, right? Oh, you're replying to emails, but it's so much more than that, right? And there are so many different avenues because
100%.
I wonder how many people are even aware that there is such a thing as the office of, you know, presidential correspondence, or
Very few.
even if they know what that is, you know, what the job entails and what you are actually doing. And of course you're an intern, but there is obviously a team of people that it is their job to do this.
Absolutely, yeah.
um, and such a niche role or such an unknown role can make such a big difference. And then when you start thinking that way and you realize, and even you know, most of the people that listen to this are probably in the UK. There
Mhm.
are so many places in the UK, and there are so many roles in the UK within government that do the you know that have an impact like this, um, and I think those are, and for the people that think that they can't make a change, these are the tangible things that you can actually go and do, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, and I think that's again that role sounds incredible. And how long was that? How many weeks was that?
Yeah, and so the summer one is the shortest. So
Yeah.
a lot of times it's 4 months. This one was only 2.5 months, but it was
Okay.
dense. Like it
Yeah.
was, it
Yeah.
was.
Yeah.
I definitely miss it, and like it kind of gave me that comfort of being like doing something. But yeah, it
Yeah.
was only 2.5 months,
Yeah.
so quite brief. But yeah, like I just wanted to touch on what you said. Like the number one message that I think like that our generation really needs to understand is this idea that like, oh, I'm like one person isn't going to make a difference, like, or if I go out, like nothing's going to change, right? Or even my friends right now in the election, right? Like, oh, I got out and I voted for Kamala, but it didn't matter. It's a completely flawed way of thinking, because what you need to understand is the way change works is if enough people out there do believe that that change is possible. Look at history, right? I'll say like the MLK bus boycotts. This is one of those things where people were making a difficult choice, right?
Yeah.
Buses were how people got to work, but they would segregate people based off race, right? The whole Rosa Parks thing.
Yeah.
So people were sat with this difficulty. Should I not take the bus and walk to work or be late, and contribute to what I care about and what I think makes the world a better place? Um, should I make that decision? And at first, a lot of people were like it's not going to make a difference if I do it, because
Yeah.
oh sure, the bus loses one customer, who gives a fuck, they're going to
Yeah.
keep doing what they're doing, right? But the only reason it worked was because enough people were like, you know what, fuck this wrong system, I'm going to
Yeah.
stand up and
Exactly.
I'm going to take
Yeah.
personal loss for this and not sit on this bus and walk to work. And you know what, at first they got screwed, they probably got fired from their job, they had huge terrible consequences on their lives, but eventually enough people started
Exactly.
doing it to where the busing industry got absolutely destroyed. The bus boycotts had to catch like wildfire.
Yeah.
So going back to our lives, there's so many things where you doing something is not going to make a difference. Like I hate littering, right? Me picking up one piece of trash
Me
that my
too.
friends
Yeah.
sometimes make fun of me for, right? It's like that's not going to fix the problem at all. You're 100% right. It's not going to fix shit. But you at least working towards what you care about, right? It's like lighting a spark. And it's probably going to take a million sparks for anything to
Yeah.
actually catch a flame and a movement to occur. But when you have that mindset, you at least open the possibility to change happen.
Exactly.
When you sit at home, when you don't join those bus boycotts like what they did in the 60s, you remove the possibility of happening it for you completely.
Yeah.
And what side of history do we want to be on? We look at history and we're always like, oh, you know, if I was during the era of slavery, if I was during this era of segregation, I would have stood the fuck up. If you were black, maybe. If you were white, probably not, right?
Yeah.
You probably would have been scared to be like, what the hell am I going to gain from
Yeah.
this? But you need to accept you like, and the thing is, Gen Z has the empathy. One thing I love about our generation is we call shit out. We have empathy. We can point to the problems in our world. we're not missing that care for the world. We're just missing that belief in ourselves. We're too busy doom scrolling and shit to realize that, listen, you having that mindset that you can make a difference is exactly what will make that change possible.
Exactly.
It's still a huge uphill battle. Climate change, how the hell are we going to tackle that? How the hell are we going to tackle corporate greed and corruption, right?
Yeah.
I don't fucking know, but you need to believe that you can take these things on, and that's how you'll get closer.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of options to do so, and we can dive into that, but I just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, and also like to add to that, using your point about littering, I'm exactly the same. I absolutely abhor it, right? And I think it's such a stupid thing, right? Like,
oh god,
like how far do you have to walk without a bin, right? Like, just put it in the bin, leave it in your pocket until you can find a bin, right? I digress. But the point is exactly like me throwing my plastic water bottle away and sort of dumping it on the ground. In the grand scheme of the world, it's not making a difference at all. However, if by my actions I convince someone else to stop littering, and they convince another 2 people, at least that mindset spreads. And if enough people change their mindset, they can then question the people that actually are making the impact. They can start questioning the companies that are. I mean, let's be real, right? Most of the waste that is dumped into oceans, it's not people. I don't go to Southend Beach and dump my Coke can into the water. It's corporations, right? But the point
70% of like I think pollution or something in the world is done by the top 100%, top 100 company. Right?
Yeah, exactly. So the point isn't that I'm gonna stop doing something because I'm gonna change the world. No, it's with my mindset. I will change enough people who will then change the world, right? And also the way I think about it is, right, like as you said, our generation is very tapped in. Like we understand that these things are wrong, yada yada. As the years go by, who do you think is going to go into government? It's our generation.
Damn right.
These people with outdated views, to not sound morbid, but they're going to die, right? Like they are going to get phased out of positions of power, of authority. Yep. And you would want the people that replace that to have the right mindsets. And that doesn't mean that they will have them now, right? At the age of 20 or 22 or 25, whatever. But the point is, if you convince them now, whilst your mind is still malleable, as you get older and as you then infiltrate those positions, and this isn't even just about politics, like this is any sector. Right? If we're talking about finance, right, which is my everlasting pain of trying to get into that field, right? But point is, the CEOs of all these companies, right? They're old white men at the end of the day with a certain mindset which creates a toxic corporate work culture, which unfortunately, whilst they're still there, no matter what you do, it's not going to change, right? However, if you convince enough people in your generation and maybe the one above you, as they then infiltrate those positions, then that's when you see the change. And I think that's exactly the point I'm making.
Yeah, and I would go beyond that, where like when you do change enough minds, you actually are the change, because it's like this like school of fish analogy, right? Like I don't know if y'all read this kid's book but it was basically about how there was this giant fish who would threaten these little fish that were like disparate, right? Not close to each other. But if you can group, like what happened in this kid's story was these fish formed a giant fish that was made out of little fish, right? And then that scared the big fish away that was eating them off. So you actually are that big fish when you are a collective, right? When you motivate those people. In the same way, right? You individually aren't going to change shit about toxic work culture. It's just such an annoying and very difficult, pervasive problem that's going to take a shit ton of effort to deal with, right?
Exactly.
But when you promote, when you individually, for example, make that difficult call where it's like, you know what, work hours have ended, I'm going to go home. When you make these little bits that are uncomfortable, right? That like, because I know as an intern, I had a little anxiety of like, should I stay a little late in the office to show that I'm working harder? But that's not what I believe in. So and thankfully I had really good bosses that were like, you should leave as soon as it hits 5. But basically it's going to cost you to probably counter this culture. This culture exists for a reason, and people get rewarded for staying longer hours, for devoting more of their life to their work. But if you do those little steps and people left and right of you get convinced, you can create a movement, and you are that movement then. And that can make how miserable are people at work, right? Very hard to find a job you actually enjoy. You doing this is so important, because how much happiness and and satisfaction are you bringing to the world if you successfully get rid of this toxic work
for
culture?
sure. And actually, just to
It's
jump
so
in there as
impactful.
well, like
Yeah.
I did an internship from August to September at a finance firm. They were
Yeah.
a global commodities trader, and again, it's your classic corporate finance work culture, right?
Hmm.
Where people get in half an hour before they're meant to, and they leave an hour after they're meant to. You spend all of your day at a desk, staring at Excel sheets, and that's exactly what I did, right? My stipulated hours were 9 to 5, right? But and I would get in early, which is that was my personal thing. I don't mind getting in early, right? Because starting the day early doesn't really bother me. But
Hmm.
it'd hit 5, and I'd be like, oh, should I stay? And this was like in
Yeah.
my first week, and I was like, I don't know, and I was so happy that literally on my first day, my manager looked at me and he said, you can, because it struck 5 and I didn't leave, right? And I was like, I'm not leaving until they say I can leave, right? And it hit, I think, like 5:15, and my manager looks at me and he's like, oh, you can leave, right? It's, you don't need to stay. And I was like, that's so refreshing that he doesn't have the
Yeah.
mindset. And on some days, I did stay late of my own accord because I was maybe in the middle of a task. And
Hmm.
I was in the accounting department, so sometimes when you're just like, when you're preparing financial statements or whatever, you just want to get them done, right? If you're like in the flow of things, it's easier to sit there, get it done. But that's fine, that was my
Yeah.
own choice. The last 2 weeks of my internship, I don't think I stayed a minute after like 5:10. I was packing
Amazing.
up by 5, I was out and gone. And I was a lot happier that way as well. And it's exactly as you're
Exactly.
saying, like it's what I believe in. And I'm sure, and some of the other interns there would definitely, like there was an intern who sat right next to me and she would stay until like 6, right? And I was like, good for you, right? Like if you
Yeah.
want to stay there, that's your own mindset. I'm leaving at 5, right?
Exactly.
And I'm not going to contribute to this work culture of I'm going to stay here for hours on end past. I'm not getting paid for this anyway, right? At the end of the day, I'm not
Yeah.
getting paid for it. And yeah, okay, fine. Someone might look at me like, oh, but the thing is, that's the other thing. No one's going to look at you and applaud you for that because that is the
Yeah.
culture. No one's going to say,
Exactly.
oh, this intern stayed an extra hour. It's like, oh, has the intern finished their work? Yes or no. That's all that matters.
Hmm.
So it's,
Yeah.
yeah, as you said, like, not giving into that culture and making sure even if you take a hit, you're still doing the thing for the right reason. And I think that's so important.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, so
Absolutely.
now going into the future, obviously we've spoken about the current political landscape. Now, as you mentioned, actually you didn't mention on call. I think you mentioned outside before we started that you had a job lined up, which obviously you're not going to do now because the political landscape has changed entirely.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so with the recent elections in mind, but also what your plans are, as you mentioned, law school, that is what you would say your ambitions are now, where you are probably looking more into law school, and then to what after that? Where do you want to go into there?
Yeah. So, I mean, I feel like it's still a game of figuring things out.
Yeah.
Like, this job offer that I had with the State Department, I thought it was really fascinating. And basically, what happened was I had 4 interviews with them, and it was a role where I was a special assistant to one of the undersecretaries of the State Department. So, like, third or
Wow.
fourth in command, like a really cool role, and where you really learn our policies
Yeah.
in global affairs. But what happened was, despite getting those 4 interviews and getting a tentative offer, the White House Personnel Department, which is basically like the employment side of things,
Yeah.
they're the ones who like rescinded their offer. They're like, we chose to go another route. But like, and so that was really disappointing. But
Yeah.
either way, now, even if I were to have gotten accepted, I would have joined the job in like a couple of weeks from now, and I would have left in 1 or 2 months. So it was not that feasible anyways because of how like the president controls all government agencies,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, now because Trump's going to be
So
in power.
just to clarify, when you
Yeah,
said you
of
would have
course.
left in a couple months, is that because of when Trump would be in office?
Yeah, so the president comes into power
Yeah.
in January, right?
Yeah.
January 20th, I think. So yes, when
It
the
would have been up
president is
until
in
that point.
power,
Yeah.
exactly, they appoint all their political appointees, which obviously are fundamentally opposed to me, so I'm going to get kicked out. So
Right,
even if I
yeah.
got this job, I would have only been there for 2 months. So yeah, and not only that, Congress is looking like the Senate's already read, and the House is looking to go Republican as well, which means that you're very like if, for example, Trump was in power but Congress was blue, you have a very real resistance because the
Yeah.
law-making body is against the president. Big deal. We don't have that. We may have all three chambers of the executive and Congress, right, the Senate and the House, around Trump's agenda, which is very dangerous, and but also it's much harder to fight that. So I think the best route and what a lot of people do is when your party's not in power, you go to law school. And now I think law school is looking good for me. As for the future of like beyond law school, I really just like one thing I don't like about politics is it's quite a stressful career. Like it's very intense, especially
Yeah.
in sessions. Very, very exhausting and demanding, right? Of your time. It doesn't necessarily, most people can attest to this. It's not good for work-life balance.
Yeah.
You constantly need to be there because a scandal can happen or some news can break out, etc. But I think it's again something important and I'm passionate about. But I'm thinking with something like law, I could aim for a practice that's a little bit less, more chill,
Yeah.
and like what I envision right now is I want to live a little bit more a life with a little bit more freedom. I like we literally discussed like this work life balancing, and I don't fuck with that, right? So I would much rather prefer to like maybe be active in more local politics, which is more like less polarized, so either state or city level politics. And I'm not sure if I even want to stay in Texas. Like I like Texas for a lot of reasons, but like I also want somewhere with really nice nature, and Texas
Yeah.
lacks that. So I envision myself as working like a more chill practice in law, being politically engaged though, like definitely being politically engaged in my life.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's kind of what I broadly envision for myself right now. Not super concrete,
Yeah.
but yeah.
And actually, to be honest, like when I was at my internship, and I spoke to people that were like 50 years old, right? They've been in finance for 20, 30 years. And again, they all said the same thing where you should have ambitions, you should have goals, but you shouldn't be rigid on, what you're going into. And you should be entirely flexible at this age, entirely.
100%.
And yeah, no, I think that's a great plan, honestly. And yeah, as you said, like, if law school's what you want to do, that's the main thing, that it's actually something you're interested in. You see
Yeah.
something tangible coming out of that, but also,
Mhm.
If something else were to come your way that would equally pique your interest, you would obviously be very open to that. And also, it's about what law school allows you to do as well. After you've done that, whether you are practicing law in like a smaller place or whether you decide to go for a bigger company, whatever path you take, you have a lot of options, and you have a lot of options to make an impact, which I think is the main thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And
And yeah, like just one thing I wanted to say is like I know like a lot of people are curious or like just like where the hell do I even start?
yeah,
Like it's honestly not that deep. There's so many nonprofit organizations that need help.
yeah,
Local animal shelters. Like change can be about anything you care about, right? Like
exactly,
individual as an individual, and there's so much help that's needed everywhere, and you can control your own terms. But I really think like if everyone was more active in their society, you learn so much through just
Yeah.
being in a place, right? You could be more exposed to the problems, and so like that's one thing like that. No matter what career you do, I think everyone should be civically engaged to an extent,
Yeah.
no matter what they choose.
No, 100%, yeah. But yeah, I would say that's a good place to wrap it up. It has been
Yeah.
almost an hour and 40, which I think will be the longest episode I've ever put out.
Really, dude,
yeah.
I feel like there's so much more I want to talk about,
No,
or like I
honestly,
could
yeah,
talk
yeah,
about.
yeah.
But yeah,
It's
it's like
really funny, right?
good.
I don't watch Joe Rogan or anything, but I saw I just went on his podcast, and he posts 3-hour videos.
Every
And I'm
day
like,
almost.
That's insanity. And it's not my mind attention span isn't shot or anything, but I also understand having done a corporate internship. Who has time in the day to
Oh
at
god,
least
yeah.
in a go you definitely could not. So I always try and keep these to an hour, but I feel with interviews like this and this series I'm starting now, there's no I don't there's a time there should be a time frame as long as I want to talk and as long as my guest wants to talk, that's the main thing. But no, I really
Yeah.
appreciate you coming on. I think this has been a great start to what hopefully will be a longer series where I continue talking to people. But no, honestly, it's been great speaking to you. It's really, really evident that you're not a pseudo intellectual. You know what you're talking about. You're informed in the decisions you make, and it's honestly the most refreshing thing to hear was what we spoke about. Mindsets, whether that's within politics or how you approach a conversation, how you debate with someone, and just not seeing life as black and white, but not, and I think that the key line is not seeing disagreement as disrespect.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, that is just evident in every walk of life. You know, you'll always find someone that you disagree with over something as simple as, you know, what your favorite color is, or something as fundamental as human rights. However,
Mhm.
there is a starting point, and there is always somewhere that you need to reason with them.
Mhm.
And yeah, I would say
Yeah.
going forward, I wish you obviously the best of luck with, you know, with law school, if that's what you finally decide to go into, or whichever,
Yeah.
you know, whatever path you
That
take.
whatever the hell I choose to do.
Yeah, man. And I also wish you the best of luck for President-elect Trump, because I can only imagine
Mhm.
the next couple months are going to be absolutely chaotic.
It's not looking good. It's not looking good.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, now all we can do is just wait and see what he will do and how that will impact, quite literally, the rest of the world. But yeah, no. Thank you so much for coming on. And for everyone listening, if you made it, you know, to an hour and 40, I applaud your attention span, and I hope this was interesting. I already have guests lined up for the next couple episodes, so hopefully that will be equally as entertaining. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. There will be links to Ali's socials and his LinkedIn, because that's the main thing we want to broaden.
Oh
And
god.
I will also try and leave a link in the description of wherever this is posted for some mental health charities, seeing as we are in November and I have a moustache for November. But yeah, thank you for listening, and I will see you next time.